The world went white and silent the moment Molly Dawson's foot found nothing but air where solid ground should have been. And in that terrible instant of falling, she understood that the blizzard howling across the Arkansas mountains had very nearly become her grave. Her scream disappeared into the wind as she plummeted through the rotted boards covering the abandoned mine shaft, her gloved hands clawing uselessly at ice, slicked wood, and frozen earth. The drop seemed endless, a nightmare descent through absolute darkness, until her body slammed against a ledge 20 feet down with enough force to drive the breath from her lungs. Pain exploded through her shoulder and hip, and for several heartbeats she could do nothing but lie there gasping, her face pressed against freezing stone, wondering if this was how she would die on this bitter January day in 1884. Above her, the pale circle of gray sky was already disappearing as snow filled the opening. The temperature had dropped 30 degrees since morning, and Molly had been caught completely unprepared when the unseasonable storm rolled down from the mountains while she was searching for her father's horse. The mare had spooked at something and bolted, and Molly had foolishly followed on foot, thinking she could catch the animal before it got far. Now the horse was long gone, and Molly was trapped at the bottom of a mine shaft that had been boarded over and forgotten years ago, long before her family had moved to this remote stretch of land outside Bentonville. She forced herself to sit up, biting back a cry as her injured shoulder protested. Nothing felt broken, but she was already shivering violently, and her coat was torn. The ledge she had landed on was barely 6 feet wide, and when she peered over the edge, she could see nothing but deeper darkness yawning below. If she had fallen another few feet, if she had missed this ledge entirely, she would be dead. "Help!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "Somebody help me!" The wind howled in response, mocking her. No one knew where she was. Her father was in town buying supplies, not due back until tomorrow if the storm kept up. Her mother had died 3 years ago, and there were no neighbors for miles. This section of the Ozark Mountains was wild and remote, the kind of place where a person could vanish without a trace. Molly pulled her knees to her chest and wrapped her arms around them, trying to preserve what little warmth remained in her body. She was 22 years old, and she had survived everything life had thrown at her since her mother's death from pneumonia. She had learned to cook and clean and manage a household, had learned to shoot and ride and help her father with the ranch work. She had turned down 3 marriage proposals because none of them felt right, because she wanted something more than just security or convenience. She wanted what her parents had shared, that deep, abiding love that made her father's eyes still grow distant with grief whenever he looked at her mother's photograph. And now she was going to freeze to death in a hole in the ground because she had chased after a stupid horse. She was crying now, tears freezing on her cheeks when she heard it. The sound was faint at first, nearly lost in the storm's fury, but it was unmistakable. Hoofbeats. Someone was out there. "Help!" she screamed again, louder this time, putting everything she had into it. "I am down here. In the mine shaft. Please help me." The hoofbeats stopped. For a terrible moment, Molly thought she had imagined them, that her desperate mind had conjured phantom rescue. Then a shadow appeared at the opening above, blocking out what little light remained. "Hello." The voice was male, deep and rough. "Someone down there?" "Yes," Molly sobbed with relief. "I fell through the boards. Please, you have to help me." "How far down are you?" "Maybe 20 feet. "I am on a ledge," she heard cursing, muffled by the wind. Then the shadow moved away. Molly's heart seized with panic that he was leaving, but a moment later he was back. "I got rope," he called down. "I am going to lower it to you. Can you tie it around yourself?" "I think so. My shoulder is hurt, but I can try." "You are going to do more than try, miss. That storm is getting worse, and we do not have much time." The authority in his voice steadied her. A moment later, she saw the rope snaking down through the falling snow, swaying slightly. She reached for it with trembling hands, nearly sobbing again when her fingers closed around the rough hemp. It took 3 tries to get the loop around her body and under her arms, her numb fingers refusing to cooperate, but finally she had it secured. "It is on," she shouted. "Hold tight, and use your feet against the wall if you can." The rope went taut, and then she was rising. The wall of the shaft scraped against her back as she ascended, and twice her feet found purchase against the frozen earth, helping to ease the strain. Her shoulders screamed in protest, but she gritted her teeth and held on. The circle of gray sky grew larger, and then hands were reaching for her, strong hands that grabbed her arms and hauled her up over the edge and onto solid ground. Molly collapsed into the snow, gasping and shaking. Through the white curtain of the blizzard, she could barely make out the man who had saved her. He was tall, dressed in a heavy coat and hat, his face obscured by a scarf wrapped around his nose and mouth. Behind him, she could see his horse, a big bay gelding standing with its head lowered against the wind. "Can you walk?" he demanded, already pulling the rope off her. "I do not know, I think so." "Then get up. My place is 1/2 mile from here, and if we do not move now, we will both freeze." He did not wait for her response, just grabbed her good arm and hauled her to her feet. Molly swayed, her legs barely supporting her weight, and without a word he swept her up and carried her to his horse. She was too cold and shocked to protest as he lifted her into the saddle and then swung up behind her, his arms coming around to gather the reins. "Hold on to the saddle horn," he ordered, and kicked the horse into motion. The ride was a blur of white and cold and pain. Molly clung to the saddle horn as instructed, while the man's body shielded her from the worst of the wind. She could feel the heat of him at her back, the solid strength of his chest, and she leaned into it shamelessly, desperate for warmth. The horse plowed through deepening drifts, and she had no idea how the animal could see where it was going. But the man seemed confident, guiding them through the storm with steady hands. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, a dark shape emerged from the whiteness. A cabin, small but sturdy, with a barn attached. The man guided the horse straight into the barn, and the sudden absence of wind was such a relief that Molly almost wept. He dismounted and then lifted her down, and this time when her legs buckled, he simply picked her up and carried her toward a door that connected the barn to the cabin. Inside was warm and dim, the heat from a potbelly stove hitting Molly like a physical force. The man set her on her feet but kept one hand on her arm, steadying her, as he quickly shut and barred the door behind them. "Get those wet clothes off," he said, unwrapping the scarf from his face. Molly got her first good look at her rescuer, and felt something flutter in her chest, despite everything she had just been through. He was younger than his voice had suggested, perhaps 26 or 27, with dark hair that curled slightly over his collar and eyes the color of creek water in summer. His face was lean and weathered, with strong bones and a firm jaw shadowed with stubble. There was something intensely focused about him, a sense of controlled competence that reminded her of a hunting wolf. "I said get those clothes off," he repeated, more sharply this time. "You are soaked through, and if you do not warm up soon, you are going to be in real trouble." Molly's fingers moved to the buttons of her coat, but they were numb and clumsy. After watching her struggle for a moment, the man cursed under his breath and stepped forward. "Let me," he said, and began unbuttoning her coat with brisk efficiency. "I do not even know your name," Molly said through chattering teeth. "Owen Parker." "And you?" "Molly Dawson." He nodded, peeling her wet coat off and tossing it aside. Her dress underneath was soaked through as well, and when his hands went to the buttons at her collar, Molly caught his wrists. "I can do the rest," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Owen met her eyes for a moment, and she saw no impropriety in his gaze, only concern. "There are blankets on the bed. Get out of everything that is wet and wrap yourself up. I need to see to my horse, but I will be back in a few minutes. Can you manage that?" She nodded, and he stepped away, heading back out to the barn. The moment the door closed behind him, Molly's trembling fingers went to her dress buttons. It took forever, but finally she had stripped down to her chemise and drawers, which were mercifully only damp rather than soaked. Even those felt too cold against her skin, but she could not bring herself to remove them. Instead, she grabbed the heavy wool blankets from the narrow bed in the corner and wrapped them around herself, then sank down onto a chair near the stove. The cabin was small but well kept, a single room with the bed in one corner, a table and chairs near the stove, and shelves lined with supplies along one wall. There was a trunk at the foot of the bed and hooks by the door holding various coats and gear. It was the home of a man who lived alone, spare and practical but not unpleasant. The door opened again, and Owen came in carrying her wet clothes. He hung them on hooks near the stove to dry, then shrugged out of his own coat. Underneath, he wore a flannel shirt and vest, both of which did little to hide the breadth of his shoulders and the lean strength of his body. He moved with an easy grace as he poured water from a bucket into a kettle and set it on the stove to heat. "How is the shoulder?" he asked without turning around. "It hurts, but I do not think anything is broken." "You were lucky. That shaft is 40 feet deep if you had fallen all the way to the bottom." He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. "Thank you," Molly said softly. "If you had not been riding by." "I was checking my fence line when the storm hit, heard you screaming and followed the sound." He glanced at her over his shoulder. "What were you doing out there?" "Looking for my father's horse. She spooked and ran off, and I followed. I did not realize how bad the storm was getting until it was too late." "Where do you live?" "About 3 miles east. The Dawson Ranch." Owen's eyebrows rose slightly. "Tom Dawson's place. You know, my father met him a few times in town. Did not know he had a daughter." The kettle began to whistle, and Owen poured hot water into 2 tin cups, adding what looked like coffee grounds and a bit of something else from a bottle on the shelf. He brought 1 cup to Molly and pressed it into her hands. "Drink. It is coffee with a bit of whiskey. It will help warm you." Molly took a grateful sip and felt the heat spread through her chest. "How long have you lived here?" "About 2 years. Bought this place from a man who was heading to California. It is not much, but it is mine." He pulled a chair closer to the stove and sat down with his own cup, studying her with those steady green eyes. "Your father is going to be worried when you do not come home. He is in town. He will not be back until the storm clears. Then he will not know you are missing until tomorrow at the earliest. This storm is going to last through the night, maybe longer. You are stuck here with me." There was no apology in his tone, just a statement of fact. Molly felt a flutter of anxiety. She was alone in a cabin with a man she had just met, a situation that would ruin her reputation if anyone found out. But what choice did she have? It was either this or freeze to death, and Owen Parker had given her no reason to fear him. If anything, he had been nothing but respectful and practical. "I understand," she said quietly. "I am grateful for your help." Owen nodded and took a sip of his coffee, his gaze moving to the window where snow was piling up against the glass. "We should eat something. Are you hungry?" Now that he mentioned it, Molly realized she was starving. She had left the house hours ago, and all the fear and cold had taken a toll. "Yes." He stood and went to the shelves, pulling down supplies. Within minutes, He had beans heating in a pot on the stove and was frying salt pork in a pan. The smell made Molly's mouth water. She watched him work, noting the ease with which he moved around the small space, the competence of his movements. He was clearly used to taking care of himself. "You have family, Owen?" she asked. He was silent for a moment, focusing on the food. "Had a brother. He died in a mining accident 5 years ago. Parents are gone too. It is just me now. I am sorry. Things happen. You learn to keep going." He spooned beans and pork onto 2 tin plates and brought one to her. "Careful, it is hot." They ate in silence, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the howl of the wind outside. The food was simple but good, and Molly felt strength returning to her body with each bite. When she was finished, Owen took her plate and set it aside, then returned to his chair. "Tell me about yourself," he said. "You live with just your father." "Yes. My mother died 3 years ago. It has been just the two of us since then." Molly pulled the blankets tighter around herself. "We raise cattle and horses. It is hard work, but it is a good life." "You ever think about leaving, going somewhere easier?" "Sometimes. But that land is all I have left of my mother. She loved it there, and my father would never leave. He needs me." Owen nodded slowly. "You are a good daughter. What about you? Do you ranch here?" "Some. I have about 30 head of cattle and a few horses. But mostly, I do carpentry work in town. Build furniture, repair buildings, that kind of thing. The ranch is more for keeping myself fed than making money." "You built that furniture?" Molly gestured to the table and chairs, which she now noticed were finely crafted, the joints smooth and tight. "I did." "It is beautiful work." Something that might have been pleasure crossed his face, but it was gone before she could be sure. "Thank you." The conversation lapsed again, and Molly found herself studying him in the firelight. There was something about Owen Parker that drew her, something beyond gratitude for being rescued. He was handsome, certainly, but it was more than that. There was a quietness to him, a self-sufficiency that she recognized because she saw it in herself. He was a man who had learned to survive alone, who did not need anyone, and yet he had not hesitated to help a stranger in need. "You must think I am foolish," she said suddenly. "Chasing after a horse in a storm like that." Owen's gaze met hers, and she saw no judgment there. "I think you love your father and did not want him to lose a valuable animal. I think you are braver than most people I know. And I think you have been taking care of everyone else for so long that you forgot to take care of yourself." The words hit Molly with unexpected force, and she felt tears prick her eyes. She looked away, blinking rapidly. "That is not true. Is it not?" His voice was gentle now. "When was the last time someone took care of you, Molly?" She could not answer, because she could not remember. Since her mother's death, she had been the one holding everything together, the one making sure her father ate and the house was clean and the ranch work got done. She had friends in town, but no one close. She had suitors, but no one who really saw her. She had been so busy surviving that she had forgotten what it felt like to be anything else. "I am sorry," Owen said quietly. "I should not have said that. No." Molly wiped at her eyes with the corner of the blanket. "You are right. I just never thought about it that way before." He stood and moved to the shelf again, returning with a thick nightshirt. "This will be big on you, but it is clean and dry. You should change out of those damp things and try to sleep. You have been through a lot today." Molly took the nightshirt, grateful for the change of subject. "What about you?" "I will sit up for a while, make sure the fire stays going. I will wake you if anything changes." He turned his back to give her privacy, and Molly quickly stripped off her chemise and drawers, replacing them with the nightshirt. It fell to her ankles and the sleeves hung past her hands, but it was warm and dry and smelled faintly of soap and wood smoke. She climbed into the bed and was surprised when Owen came over and tucked the blankets around her like she was a child. "Sleep," he said softly. "You are safe here." And despite everything, despite being in a strange place with a man she barely knew, Molly believed him. She closed her eyes and let exhaustion pull her under. When she woke, pale light was filtering through the window, and the storm had finally stopped. Molly sat up, wincing at the stiffness in her shoulder, and looked around. Owen was asleep in the chair by the stove, his head tilted back against the wall, his features relaxed in sleep. He looked younger like this, less guarded, and Molly found herself unable to look away. As if sensing her gaze, his eyes opened. For a moment they simply looked at each other across the small cabin, and Molly felt something pass between them, something she could not name but that made her heart beat faster. "Morning," Owen said, his voice rough with sleep. "How do you feel?" "Sore, but better." "The storm stopped." "Yeah. Dumped about 2 feet of snow, but the wind is down. I need to check on my cattle and dig out the barn door. Then I will take you home." Molly felt an unexpected pang at the thought of leaving. She pushed it aside and stood, the blankets falling away. Owen's gaze flicked over her in the too large nightshirt, but there was nothing improper in the look, only assessment. "Your clothes should be dry by now," he said, standing and stretching. Molly heard his spine crack. "I will step outside while you change." He pulled on his coat and went out, and Molly dressed quickly in her now dry clothes. Her dress was wrinkled and her coat had a tear in the sleeve, but everything was at least warm. She was folding the nightshirt when Owen came back in, stamping snow from his boots. "Breakfast first," he announced, and set about making coffee and frying eggs. Molly helped without asking, finding bread and butter, setting the table. They moved around each other easily, as if they had done this 100 times before, and Molly felt that strange flutter in her chest again. They ate quickly, and then Owen saddled his horse while Molly waited in the barn watching him work. His movements were efficient and practiced, and the big bay gelding stood patiently for him, clearly well trained. "What is his name?" Molly asked. "Ranger. Had him since he was a colt." Owen finished tightening the cinch and turned to her. "Ready." The ride to the Dawson ranch was slow going through the deep snow, but Ranger was strong and sure-footed. Molly sat in front of Owen again, acutely aware of his presence behind her, the warmth of his body, the strength of his arms as he held the reins. The landscape was transformed by the snow, everything white and clean and beautiful, and in the clear morning light, Molly could see details she had missed in the storm. Owen's cabin sat in a small valley with good water and timber, a decent piece of land. She could see why he had bought it. When they finally reached the Dawson ranch, her father's horse was in the corral, looking none the worse for wear after her adventure. The house was dark and quiet, her father clearly still in town, and Molly felt relief wash over her. She would not have to explain where she had been. Owen helped her dismount and walked her to the porch. They stood there for a moment, neither quite willing to say goodbye. "Thank you," Molly said finally, "for everything. You saved my life. Anyone would have done the same." "No, they would not have. Not everyone would have gone out in that storm to investigate a sound. Not everyone would have taken care of me the way you did." She met his eyes. "You are a good man, Owen Parker." Something flickered in his expression, something that might have been surprise or pleasure or longing. "Take care of that shoulder, and maybe think twice before chasing after runaway horses." "I will." She hesitated, then said, "Will I see you again?" "Bentonville is not that big a town. I expect we will run into each other." It was not the answer she wanted, but Molly nodded and turned to go inside. She was at the door when his voice stopped her. "Molly," she turned back. Owen was still standing there, his hat in his hands, looking at her with those steady green eyes. "Be careful," he said. "And if you ever need help with anything, anything at all, My door is always open." Then he put his hat back on, mounted Ranger, and rode away without looking back. Molly stood on the porch until he disappeared from sight, one hand pressed to her chest where her heart was beating too fast. The next few days were busy. Her father returned from town with supplies and news that the storm had been worse than anyone expected, with several families snowed in and a few cattle lost. Molly told him she had spent the storm in the house, safe and warm, and tried to ignore the guilt of the lie. But how could she tell him the truth? That she had spent the night alone with a man, even in the most innocent of circumstances. It would ruin her reputation and Owen's too, but she could not stop thinking about him. As she went about her daily chores, cooking and cleaning and helping her father with the livestock, her mind kept returning to those hours in the cabin. The way Owen had taken care of her without making her feel helpless. The way he had seen her, really seen her, in a way no one else ever had. The quiet competence of him, the strength tempered with gentleness. A week after the storm, Molly made an excuse to ride into Bentonville. Her father needed nothing from town, but she claimed she wanted to visit the general store to see if any new fabric had come in. It was a thin excuse, and she thought her father gave her an odd look, but he did not question it. Bentonville was bustling despite the cold, people going about their business on the muddy streets. Molly tied her horse outside the general store and went in, but her heart was not in shopping for fabric. She made a few half-hearted purchases, then stepped back outside and looked around, hoping to catch a glimpse of Owen. She saw him almost immediately. He was across the street, coming out of the hardware store with a load of lumber over one shoulder. He was dressed in work clothes, his coat open despite the cold, and he moved with that same easy grace she remembered. Molly's heart jumped, and before she could talk herself out of it, she was crossing the street. "Owen," he turned, and for a moment his face was blank with surprise. Then something warm kindled in his eyes. "Molly, I did not expect to see you in town. I had some shopping to do." "How have you been?" "Good. Working on a project for the hotel, building new furniture for the dining room." He adjusted the lumber on his shoulder. "How is your shoulder?" "Much better. Barely hurts at all now." They stood there awkwardly, people passing by on the street, and Molly was suddenly aware of the curious glances they were getting. A respectable young woman did not stand on the street talking to a single man, not without a chaperone. But she could not bring herself to care. "I have been thinking about you," she blurted out, then felt her face flame. I have been wondering how you were, after the storm and everything." Owen's expression softened. "I have been thinking about you too." The admission sent warmth flooding through her. "Really, Molly, He glanced around at the watching faces and seemed to come to a decision. "I need to deliver this lumber, but after, would you maybe want to get some coffee? At the hotel restaurant. It is all proper and public," he added quickly. "I just thought it would be nice to talk without half the town staring at us." "I would like that very much. Give me half an hour. I will meet you there." Molly nodded and watched him walk away, her heart singing. Half an hour felt like an eternity, but she filled it by actually looking at fabric in the general store and forcing herself to make a selection she did not need. When the time was up, she walked to the hotel with measured steps, trying not to look too eager. Owen was already there, seated at a corner table away from the windows. He stood when she approached, pulling out a chair for her, and Molly felt a little thrill at the courtesy. When was the last time a man had pulled out a chair for her? "I ordered coffee," Owen said as she sat. "And I took the liberty of ordering some cake. I hope that is all right." "That sounds wonderful." The waitress brought their order and Molly busied herself adding cream to her coffee, suddenly shy. Now that they were here, she did not know what to say. "How is your father?" Owen asked, breaking the silence. He is well, busy with the ranch. He lost a few head in the storm, but not as many as some of our neighbors. That is good. And your horse? The one that ran away, she came back the next morning, none the worse for wear. My father thinks she may have found shelter in the old line shack on the north side of our property. Smart horse. They sipped their coffee and Molly tried the cake. It was good, rich and sweet, but she barely tasted it. All her attention was on the man across from her, the way the light from the window caught in his dark hair, the strong lines of his hands as he held his cup. "Molly," Owen said suddenly, setting down his cup, "I want to be honest with you. I have not been able to stop thinking about you since that night, and I know it is crazy because we barely know each other, but I would like to know you better. If you want that too," Molly's breath caught. "I do, I want that very much." Relief flooded his face. "Good, that is good. But we need to do this right. I do not want anyone talking about you, saying things that are not true, so I want to do this properly. Court you the right way." "Court me." Molly felt her cheeks heat again, but this time with pleasure. "If you will let me, if your father will let me. I know I am not much, just a carpenter with a small ranch, but I am honest and I work hard, and I would treat you with the respect you deserve." "Owen." Molly reached across the table and laid her hand over his. "You are more than enough. You are everything." His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong, and for a moment they just sat there, holding hands across the table, smiling at each other like fools. Molly did not care who saw. She felt like she was floating, like the world had suddenly become brighter and more full of possibility. "I need to meet your father," Owen said. "Ask his permission properly. He will like you, I know he will. I hope so." Owen squeezed her hand gently before letting go. "Can I come by tomorrow, in the afternoon?" "Yes, come for dinner. I will make something special." They finished their coffee and cake, talking more easily now, sharing stories about their lives and their dreams. Molly learned that Owen had come to Arkansas from Missouri after his brother died, looking for a fresh start. That he had taught himself carpentry by reading books and practicing, and that his dream was to one day have a real furniture shop in town. Owen learned that Molly loved to read, that she had a small collection of books she had inherited from her mother, and that she dreamed of someday visiting St. Louis to see the big city. When they finally left the hotel, the sun was low in the sky and Molly knew she needed to get home. Owen walked her to her horse and helped her mount, his hands lingering on her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Tomorrow," he said, looking up at her. "Tomorrow," she agreed and rode away with her heart full of light. When Molly told her father that evening that a man was coming to dinner the next day, a man who wanted to court her, Tom Dawson's eyebrows nearly hit his hairline. "A man? What man?" "Owen Parker. He lives a few miles west of here. He is a carpenter and rancher." "Owen Parker." Her father stroked his beard thoughtfully. "I know who he is. Seen him in town a few times. Keeps to himself mostly. How did you meet him?" Molly had prepared for this question. "I ran into him in town today and we got to talking. He seems very nice and I would like to get to know him better, with your permission." It was not quite a lie. She had run into him in town after all. The fact that they had met a week earlier under very different circumstances was something she would tell her father eventually, but not yet. Not when things were so new and fragile. Her father studied her for a long moment, and Molly wondered what he saw. Did he notice the brightness in her eyes, the way she could not quite stop smiling? Did he see his daughter falling in love? "Well," he said finally, "I suppose I should meet this Owen Parker and judge for myself. What time is he coming?" 3 o'clock. "I thought I would make a roast with potatoes and carrots." "Your mother's recipe?" "Yes." Tom Dawson's expression softened. She would have liked that. She always said the way to judge a man's character was to see how he handled himself at a family dinner. He pointed a finger at Molly. But I am going to ask him some hard questions, and if I do not like what I hear, he is not courting you. Understood? Understood. Molly kissed her father's cheek. Thank you, Papa. The next day, Molly was up before dawn, preparing for Owen's visit. She cleaned the house until everything sparkled, arranged her mother's best china on the table, and spent hours preparing the roast. She changed her dress 3 times, finally settling on a blue calico that brought out her eyes. Her father watched all this with amusement, and something that might have been sadness, and Molly knew he was thinking about her mother, about how life kept moving forward whether you were ready or not. Owen arrived exactly at 3 o'clock, riding up to the house on Ranger with a bouquet of winter wildflowers in one hand and a box in the other. He was dressed in his best clothes, his hair neatly combed, his boots polished, and Molly's heart swelled at the effort he had clearly made. She met him at the door, and he handed her the flowers with a slightly nervous smile. I know they are not much, but I thought you might like them. They are beautiful, thank you. And this, he handed her the box, is for your father. It is a pipe rack. I made it myself. Molly opened the box and saw a beautifully crafted wooden rack with intricate carvings along the edges. It was clearly the work of a master craftsman, and she was touched that Owen had thought to bring a gift for her father. He is going to love it, she said softly. Come in. Tom Dawson was waiting in the parlor, and he stood when they entered. He was a big man, tall and broad-shouldered despite his 50 years, with iron-gray hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. He looked Owen up and down with the assessing gaze of a man who had seen his share of life. Mr. Dawson, Owen said, stepping forward with his hand extended. Thank you for having me in your home. I am Owen Parker. Tom shook his hand with a firm grip. Owen, Molly tells me you are a carpenter. Yes, sir, and I have a small ranch as well, though nothing as large as yours. She also says you want to court my daughter. I do, sir, with your permission. Tom crossed his arms over his chest. Why? The blunt question would have thrown some men, but Owen did not flinch. Because she is the finest woman I have ever met, sir. She is smart and strong and kind, and being with her makes me want to be a better man. I know I do not have much to offer right now, just a small cabin and my skills, but I am a hard worker and I am honest. I would treat your daughter with the respect and care she deserves. There was a long silence as Tom studied Owen, and Molly held her breath. Then her father's stern expression softened slightly. That is a good answer. Come, sit. Let us talk before dinner. The next hour was nerve-wracking for Molly as her father interrogated Owen about his background, his prospects, his plans for the future. But Owen answered every question honestly and directly, never exaggerating or making promises he could not keep. He talked about his carpentry business, about the furniture commission he had just gotten from the hotel, about his dream of one day opening a real shop. He talked about his ranch and his plans to expand it slowly over the years. He was realistic about his limitations but confident in his abilities, and Molly could see her father warming to him. When she finally announced that dinner was ready, Tom clapped Owen on the shoulder. You are all right, young man. Let us see if you can handle my daughter's cooking. She learned from the best. Dinner was a success. The roast was tender and flavorful, and Owen complimented everything profusely. The conversation flowed easily, with Owen asking intelligent questions about ranching and Tom sharing stories about the early days when he and Molly's mother had first settled the land. Molly watched them talk and felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the food. After dinner, Tom excused himself to check on the livestock, giving them a moment alone. Owen helped Molly clear the table and they stood together at the wash basin, their hands occasionally brushing as they worked. "Your father is a good man," Owen said quietly. "He likes you. I can tell." "I am glad. I want to do this right, Molly. I want to prove to both of you that I am worthy of you." Molly turned to face him, her hands still damp from the dishwater. "You do not have to prove anything to me. I already know what kind of man you are." Owen's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing gently across her cheekbone. "You barely know me. I know enough. I know you did not hesitate to save a stranger's life. I know you took care of me when I needed help. I know you are kind and honest and strong. That is enough for me." Molly. Her name was a whisper on his lips, and she saw the yearning in his eyes, the same yearning she felt in her own heart. He leaned closer, and for a moment she thought he might kiss her. But then they heard the sound of the door opening, her father returning, and Owen stepped back with a rueful smile. "Soon," he promised softly, so only she could hear. "When the time is right." Over the following weeks, Owen became a regular presence at the Dawson ranch. He came for dinner twice a week, and on Sundays he would accompany them to church in Bentonville, sitting beside Molly in the pew and singing hymns in a surprisingly good baritone. The town quickly learned that Molly Dawson was being courted by Owen Parker, and to Molly's relief, the gossip was mostly positive. Owen was well respected for his craftsmanship and his honest dealings, and people seemed pleased that he had finally found someone. They took long walks together around the ranch, with her father's permission of course, and Owen taught her about woodworking while she told him about the books she loved. They sat on the porch in the evenings, talking until the stars came out, and Molly learned 100 little things about him. How he took his coffee black, how he whistled when he worked, how he had a soft spot for stray animals and had once nursed an injured hawk back to health, how he still missed his brother every single day but had learned to carry the grief without letting it crush him. And Molly fell more in love with him with each passing day. It was during one of their walks in mid-February that Owen stopped suddenly and turned to face her. They were near the stream that ran through the Dawson property, the water still partially frozen, the bare trees stark against a gray sky. "Molly, I need to tell you something," he said, his expression serious. Her heart jumped with sudden fear. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong. But I need to be completely honest with you about how we met, about that night in the storm." Molly's breath caught. "What do you mean?" "I did not just happen to be riding by when you fell into that mine shaft. I had been watching you, watching me." She did not know whether to be flattered or alarmed. "Not like that." Owen ran a hand through his hair, clearly struggling for words. "A few months ago I was in town buying supplies and I saw you outside the general store. You were helping an old woman carry her packages to her wagon, and the way you were with her, so patient and kind, it just struck me. I asked around and found out who you were, and after that, I guess I started noticing you whenever you came to town. And then one day I was riding near your ranch, and I saw you out working with the horses, and you looked so capable and strong, and I wanted to meet you, but I did not know how. So you were following me during the storm." "No. I really was checking my fence line when the storm hit. But when I heard screaming and I realized it was coming from the direction of your ranch, I put together who it might be. And I was terrified, Molly. I was terrified that something had happened to you before I ever got the chance to know you." Molly stared at him, processing this information. She should probably be angry that he had been noticing her without her knowledge, but instead she felt a strange flutter of warmth. "You wanted to meet me." "I did. I do. From the moment I first saw you." Owen took her hands in his. "I am telling you this because I do not want there to be any secrets between us. I want you to know the truth, all of it, before this goes any further." "How far is this going to go, Owen?" He met her eyes steadily. "As far as you will let it. I want to marry you, Molly." I know it is fast, and I know we have only been courting for a few weeks, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. I am in love with you. And I will wait as long as you need me to wait, but I need you to know how I feel." Tears sprang to Molly's eyes, but they were happy tears. "You love me?" "I do, so much it scares me sometimes." "I love you too." The words came out in a rush, and suddenly Molly was laughing and crying at the same time. "I have loved you since that night in the cabin, I think. Maybe even before that, in that moment when you pulled me out of the mine shaft. You saved my life, Owen, and then you gave me a reason to live it." Owen pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, and she did not care. She buried her face against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart, and thought that this was where she belonged. This was home. "Marry me," Owen whispered against her hair. "Say you will marry me, Molly." "Yes, yes, I will marry you." He pulled back just enough to look at her face, and then his mouth was on hers, kissing her with a passion and tenderness that made her knees weak. Molly kissed him back with everything she had, pouring all her love and hope and joy into the kiss. It was her first kiss, and it was perfect. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "I need to ask your father properly. I wanted to ask you first to make sure you would say yes, but I will do this right. He will say yes. He loves you almost as much as I do. I hope you are right." They walked back to the house hand in hand, and Owen asked to speak with Tom privately. Molly waited in the kitchen, trying not to pace, until her father called her in. He was smiling, and Owen was grinning like he had just won the lottery. "He says you accepted his proposal," Tom said, pulling Molly into a hug. "I suppose I am going to have a son-in-law. Is that all right, Papa?" "It is more than all right. Owen is a good man, and he will take care of you. Your mother would have approved." He pulled back and looked at her seriously. "Are you sure this is what you want? You are still young. You do not have to rush into anything. I am sure. I have never been more sure of anything." Tom nodded and turned to Owen. "Then you have my blessing. Take care of my girl." "I will, sir. I promise you that." They decided on a spring wedding in late April when the wildflowers would be blooming and the weather would be mild. It gave them 2 months to prepare, and Molly threw herself into the planning with enthusiasm. She sewed her own wedding dress, white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs, and made curtains for Owen's cabin. She and Owen spent their time together making plans for their future, talking about how they would combine their lives and their dreams. Owen worked harder than ever on his carpentry projects, saving every penny he could for their life together. He built a larger bed for the cabin, and a rocking chair he said was for Molly to read in. He fixed up the barn and added shelves to the cabin for her books. He was building a life for them, and Molly loved him more each day for the care he took. The wedding was held in the small church in Bentonville on a beautiful Sunday in late April. Molly wore her white dress and carried a bouquet of wildflowers that Owen had picked that morning. Her father walked her down the aisle with tears in his eyes, and Owen waited at the altar in a new suit he had bought special for the occasion. He looked so handsome that Molly's breath caught. They spoke their vows in front of the whole town, promising to love and honor each other for as long as they lived. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Owen kissed her gently, reverently, and Molly felt tears of joy streaming down her face. The reception was held at the hotel, with food and dancing and toasts to the happy couple. Molly danced with her father, with Owen, with half the men in town it seemed, but she only had eyes for her husband. Her husband. The word filled her with wonder. As the sun began to set, Owen and Molly said their goodbyes and rode back to the cabin, now her home, on Ranger. Molly's horse followed behind, carrying her belongings. The evening was warm and the sky was painted with orange and pink, and Molly felt like she was riding into a dream. At the cabin, Owen dismounted and then lifted her down, but instead of setting her on her feet, he carried her to the door. "Tradition," he said with a smile, and carried her over the threshold. Inside, the cabin was warm and welcoming. Owen had lit candles and there were fresh wildflowers on the table. He set Molly down gently and looked at her with such love that she felt her heart might burst. "Hello, Mrs. Parker," he said softly. "Hello, Mr. Parker." He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her slowly, deeply, and Molly felt desire kindle in her belly. She had been raised to be modest, to not think about such things, but now she was married, and this was right and good, and everything she had been waiting for. "I love you," Owen whispered against her lips. "I will love you every day for the rest of my life." "Show me," Molly whispered back, and he did. Their wedding night was everything Molly had hoped for and more. Owen was gentle and patient, taking his time, making sure she felt safe and cherished. There was some pain, but it was overshadowed by pleasure and intimacy, and the incredible feeling of being completely joined with the man she loved. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the big bed he had built, and Molly rested her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat, feeling more content than she had ever felt in her life. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" "For pulling me out of that mine shaft. For saving my life." Owen's arms tightened around her. "You saved mine too, Molly. I did not even realize how alone I was until I met you. You brought light into my life. We saved each other then. I suppose we did." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other, and when Molly woke in the morning to find Owen watching her with soft eyes, she knew that every difficult moment in her life had led to this, had led to him, and it had all been worth it. The first year of their marriage was both challenging and wonderful. Combining two households and two lives was not always easy, and there were moments of friction as they learned each other's habits and rhythms. Owen liked to wake early and work in silence until he had his coffee. Molly liked to talk in the mornings, planning out her day. Owen was neat and organized. Molly tended to leave books and sewing projects scattered around, but they worked through each difference with patience and humor, and their love only grew stronger. Molly still helped her father with the Dawson ranch several times a week, riding over to cook meals and help with the livestock. Owen came with her when he could, and the two men worked well together, expanding Tom's herd and fixing up buildings that had fallen into disrepair. Tom seemed happier than he had been in years, and Molly knew it was because he saw that she was happy. Owen's carpentry business was thriving. Word had spread about the quality of his work, and he had more commissions than he could keep up with. He worked long hours in a workshop he had built near the cabin, crafting tables and chairs and cabinets for people all over the county. Molly would bring him lunch and sit with him while he worked, watching the way his hands moved over the wood, the way he coaxed beauty and function from raw lumber. In the evenings, they would sit together on the porch he had expanded, Molly reading aloud while Owen worked on smaller projects or simply listened. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing their thoughts and dreams, and Molly marveled at how well they understood each other. Owen seemed to know what she needed before she asked, and she learned to read his moods and know when he needed space or comfort or simply her presence. Their physical relationship deepened as well. What had started with gentle exploration grew into passionate intimacy, and Molly discovered a side of herself she had not known existed. Owen was an attentive lover, always making sure she found pleasure, and Molly loved the way he looked at her, the way he touched her, as if she was the most precious thing in the world. It was in late summer, nearly 4 months after their wedding, that Molly realized her courses were late. She waited another week to be sure, then told Owen over breakfast one morning, "I think I might be with child," she said, her heart pounding. Owen's fork clattered to his plate. "You think? Are you sure?" "Not completely. But my courses are 3 weeks late and I have been feeling strange in the mornings, tired and a little sick to my stomach." He was around the table in a second, pulling her up and into his arms. "A baby. We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Molly asked, suddenly nervous. They had not discussed children, not really, though she knew he wanted them eventually. "Happy? Molly, I am over the moon. I am terrified and thrilled, and I cannot believe I get to have this with you." He kissed her soundly. "We need to get you to the doctor. Make sure everything is all right." The doctor in Bentonville confirmed it. Molly was pregnant, about 3 months along and healthy. The baby would come in early March. Owen held her hand through the whole examination, his face a mixture of pride and anxiety, and on the ride home he made her promise to take it easy, to not work too hard, to let him take care of her. "I am pregnant, not an invalid," Molly protested, but she was touched by his concern. "I know. But I want to make sure you are both safe. You and the baby are the most important things in my life." As the months passed and Molly's belly grew, Owen became almost comically protective. He built her a more comfortable rocking chair and insisted she spend part of each afternoon resting. He took over most of the heavy chores and worried if she so much as walked too far. Molly found it endearing and exasperating in equal measure, but she knew it came from love. Her father was delighted about the baby, already talking about teaching his grandchild to ride and rope. He helped Owen start building a cradle, a beautiful piece with intricate carvings, and the two men spent hours in the workshop together, bonding over their shared love for Molly and their excitement about the baby. Winter came again, and Molly sometimes thought about that night a year ago when she had fallen into the mine shaft, when Owen had pulled her to safety. It seemed like a lifetime ago, and yet the memory was vivid. That night had changed everything, had set her on the path to this life, this love, this child growing inside her. The baby came on a cold March morning after a long night of labor. The midwife from town came to help, and Owen paced outside the bedroom door, nearly wearing a hole in the floorboards. When Molly finally screamed and the baby's first cry filled the air, Owen burst through the door, not caring that it was not proper. "Is she all right? Is the baby all right?" "Both are fine," the midwife said with a smile. "You have a son, Mr. Parker." Owen's face lit up with wonder, and he came to the bed where Molly lay exhausted but beaming, cradling their newborn son. The baby was red-faced and squalling, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists that waved in the air. "A son," Owen breathed, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. "Molly, he is perfect, he is. Do you want to hold him?" Owen looked terrified for a moment, but then he carefully took the baby, supporting his head the way the midwife showed him. The baby quieted immediately, looking up at his father with unfocused eyes, and Owen's face transformed with love. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I am your papa. And I promise I am going to take such good care of you. You and your mama are my whole world." Molly felt tears streaming down her face, but they were happy tears. She had never seen anything more beautiful than her husband holding their son. They named him Thomas, after Molly's father, and he was a happy, healthy baby. Tom Dawson cried when they told him the name, and he visited almost daily to see his grandson. Owen was a devoted father, getting up for nighttime feedings and changings, rocking Thomas when he was fussy, playing with him for hours. Molly watched them together and fell in love with her husband all over again. The years passed in a blur of happiness. Thomas grew into a bright, energetic boy with his father's green eyes and his mother's smile. When he was 2, Molly became pregnant again, and this time they had a daughter they named Sarah. 2 years after that came another son, James, and their little cabin was full of noise and laughter and love. Owen's business continued to thrive, and he was able to buy more land and expand their ranch. He built a larger house for their growing family, with multiple bedrooms and a proper parlor, and Molly made it into a warm, welcoming home. They worked hard, but they were happy, and every night they fell into bed exhausted but content. Molly's father grew older, his hair turning completely white, but he remained active and involved in his grandchildren's lives. He taught Thomas to ride and Sarah to rope and James to track animals in the woods. He told them stories about their grandmother, keeping her memory alive, and Molly was grateful that her children got to know her mother through his words. When Thomas was 10, Sarah 8, and James 6, Owen surprised Molly with a trip to St. Louis. They left the children with Tom for a week and took the train to the big city, and Molly was amazed by everything she saw. The tall buildings, the crowded streets, the shops full of goods from all over the world. They went to the theater and ate at fancy restaurants and walked along the riverfront, and it was everything Molly had dreamed of when she was younger. "Thank you," she told Owen on their last night as they sat in their hotel room looking out at the city lights, "for making my dreams come true." "You made my dreams come true first," Owen said, pulling her close. "Everything I have, everything I am is because of you. You are my heart, Molly. And you are mine." They made love that night with the passion of newlyweds, even though they had been married for more than a decade. Their love had only deepened with time, weathered by the challenges of life but never broken. They had built something strong and beautiful together, a family and a life that meant everything. Back home, their children greeted them with wild enthusiasm, and life returned to its normal rhythm. Owen continued to build furniture and ranch, becoming one of the most respected craftsmen in the region. Molly helped him with the business side of things, keeping books and managing orders, and together they built something that would last. When Tom Dawson passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72, Molly grieved deeply, but she found comfort in Owen's arms and in her children. They inherited the Dawson Ranch, and Owen and Thomas, now a young man of 16, ran both properties together. Sarah surprised everyone by showing a talent for carpentry, and Owen taught her the trade, proud to have a daughter who shared his skill. James, the youngest, loved the land and the animals and was happiest when he was outside working the ranch. As the years continued to pass, Molly and Owen watched their children grow into adults. Thomas married a sweet girl from town and took over running the Dawson Ranch. Sarah opened her own furniture shop in Bentonville, the first female carpenter in the region, and proved just as skilled as her father. James married and continued to work the Parker Ranch, expanding the herd and bringing in new breeding stock. Grandchildren came, filling their lives with new joy. Molly loved being a grandmother, loved spoiling the little ones and then sending them home to their parents. She and Owen would sit on their porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the land they had worked so hard to build, and count their blessings. "You ever think about that night?" Molly asked one evening when they were both in their 60s. "The night I fell into the mine shaft." Owen smiled and took her hand, his fingers still strong despite his age. "I think about it all the time. I think about how close I came to never knowing you. How different my life would have been if I had not been riding by that day. I was so scared. I thought I was going to die down there. And then I pulled you up and found the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, covered in dirt and snow, looking at me like I had hung the moon." He brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Best day of my life, Molly. Well, that and our wedding day. And the days our children were born. All right, I have had a lot of best days, but that one started everything. You saved my life. And you saved mine. We have been over this." Molly laughed and leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the warmth of his body against hers. They had been married for over 40 years, and she loved him more now than she had at 22. The passion had mellowed into deep companionship, but it was no less intense for that. He was still the first person she wanted to see in the morning and the last one she wanted to talk to at night. "I love you, Owen Parker," she whispered. "I love you too, Molly Parker. Always have, always will." They sat there as the stars came out, hand in hand. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life of love and meaning. The blizzard that had nearly killed Molly had instead brought her the greatest gift of her life. Sometimes, she thought, the worst moments led to the best ones. Sometimes, salvation came in the form of a cowboy with a rope and steady hands and a heart big enough to hold all the love in the world. Years later, when Molly was 75 and Owen 79, he built her one last gift. It was a rocking chair, the finest he had ever made, with carvings of wildflowers and their children's names and the date they had met etched into the wood. He presented it to her on their anniversary, and Molly cried as she ran her fingers over the smooth wood. "It is beautiful," she breathed. "Owen, this is too much." "Nothing is too much for you. I wanted you to have something to rock our great-grandchildren in, something that will last long after we are gone." He helped her sit in the chair, and it fit her perfectly, molded to her body like it had been made just for her. Which, of course, it had been. "Will you sit with me?" she asked, and Owen pulled up another chair beside her. They sat together, rocking gently, holding hands as they had done for decades. "Tell me a story," Molly said. "Tell me about the cowboy who saved the girl in the blizzard." Owen smiled. "Once upon a time, in the winter of 1884, there was a terrible storm in the mountains of Arkansas. A young woman went out looking for her father's horse and fell into an abandoned mine shaft. She thought she was going to die down there in the dark and cold, but then she heard hoofbeats. A cowboy was riding by and he heard her screams. He lowered a rope and pulled her up, and when he saw her face, he knew his life would never be the same. "What happened to them?" Molly asked, though she knew the answer by heart. "They fell in love. They got married and had 3 beautiful children and more grandchildren than they could count. They built a life together, full of hard work and laughter and love. And when they were old and gray, they sat together in rocking chairs and remembered how it all began, and they knew they were the luckiest people in the world." "That is a good story," Molly said softly. "It is the best story, because it is ours." They sat together as the sun set, two people who had loved each other through everything life had thrown at them. Molly thought about that terrified girl in the mine shaft, certain she was going to die, and she wished she could go back and tell her that everything was going to be all right. Better than all right. That the rope coming down through the darkness was not just salvation, but the beginning of everything. Owen squeezed her hand, and she squeezed back, and they rocked together in comfortable silence as another day ended. They had built something rare and precious, a love that had lasted through decades, a love that had created a family and a legacy. And it had all started with a blizzard, a mine shaft, a rope, and a cowboy brave enough to answer a stranger's cry for help. That was their story. That was their life. And as Molly looked at Owen's weathered face, still handsome to her after all these years, she knew she would not change a single moment of it. Not the fear, not the pain, not the challenges. Because all of it, every single bit, had led her here. To this man, this love, this beautiful life they had built together. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what? For everything. For pulling me up, for loving me, for giving me this life." Owen's eyes were bright with emotion. "Thank you for saying yes. For taking a chance on a carpenter with more dreams than money. For making me the happiest man alive. We did pretty well, did we not?" We did better than pretty well, Molly. We did amazing. And as the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared, Molly and Owen Parker rocked together in their chairs, their hands intertwined, their hearts still beating as one after all these years. Their children were grown and happy. Their grandchildren were thriving. Their legacy was secure. And their love, the love that had started in a snowstorm so long ago, burned as bright as ever. It was a good life. It was a beautiful life, and it was theirs.